Swastiastu, Om Awikanamastu, Namo Siddhaya.
The Balinese believe in the fundamental unity of all aspects of human existence. Death to them is not opposed to life, any more than the mountains can be said to be opposed to the sea, day to night, or new moon to full moon. Children imitating their parents by acting the clamorous carrying of a funeral bier to the cremation ground is indicative of this philosophy. Begetting children is both a practical and spiritual concern for all Balinese. Children are necessary not only to care for parents in their old age and to perpetuate the family line, but also to perform the death rites that liberate the soul for reincarnation. Childless people are perceived to suffer torments in the afterworld, where a childless woman might be condemned to suckle a giant caterpillar. For the people of Bali, religion is an integral part of daily life. Their religion is a complex system of prescriptions and rules of avoidance aimed to maintain a balanced relationship between man, nature, and the supernatural realm. Acknowledgement of the spiritual world is manifest in everything a Balinese does. From around 5 months, the time a developing fetus is regarded as viable, through childhood development, maturity, old age, death, and rebirth, all transitions and dangers are marked by rites. The community of this village are preparing for a rite which will assist the continuing passage of the souls of their dead, cremated 42 days previously. A parallel rite takes place for a baby 42 days after birth. Death, like birth, is a protracted affair. In a series of rites conducted by high priests, the souls of the deceased are invited to enter these sandalwood idealized portrait effigies bearing their names. The spiritual link between the world of man and that beyond is eternal. Balinese rites encapsulate a blend of sophistication and simplicity, vibrancy and eeriness. They engage all the senses. A white bull, a symbol of JIWA, thus of dissolution, is led around the ceremonial space. The release of the individual soul from its earthly ties is spiritually dangerous and paved with difficulties. As in all rites, fire, the manifestation of the god Brahma, and water, the manifestation of Vishnu, are necessary ingredients. The descendants of the deceased burn the essential symbolic elements of the effigies and then grind them into a charcoal paste. In a ritual procession, the ashes are taken to the sea. Together with other ritual objects, they are scattered into the nullifying sea in much the same way as the ashes of the cremated physical body were earlier consigned to the sea. The final deification of ancestral spirits may take place decades later. While the rites that surround death are the more spectacular, those of pregnancy and birth are regarded as equally dangerous. During both, the gateway between this world and the supernatural realm of the ancestors is forced open. Around the 5th month of pregnancy, the first of the many life rites conducted by parents for their children takes place. Before this time, the fetus is regarded as incomplete, and custom forbids its ritual acknowledgement. The recitation of stories from sacred Lontar manuscripts in the presence of the mother is believed to confer benefit and skills upon her unborn child. From this stage of life, the fetus is seen to contain within itself spiritual siblings, which the Balinese term kanda empat. They represent the potential of the 4 elements of life: fire, water, earth, and air. At the time of birth, both mother and infant are perceived to be vulnerable to attack by witches and other harmful spirits which can precipitate disease processes. Traditionally, a woman gives birth on the earth in a sitting position, supported from behind by the father of her child. At birth, the kanda empat manifest as the placenta, blood, amniotic fluid, and umbilical cord. Throughout the life of their owner, they remain objects of constant ritual attention. A black river stone and a magically significant plant mark the ground where they are buried. Until the mother's milk begins to flow, the baby is fed the flesh of a young coconut. For the first 3 days after the birth of their child, both mother and father are confined to their house compound. Shortly after birth, the father and a close relative arrange a séance with a spirit medium in order to identify the ancestor reincarnated in the newborn child. Through transpossession, the reincarnating spirit reveals potentially threatening situations that might bear upon the infant's present and future well-being. Unredeemed misdeeds or unfulfilled vows during the previous life of the reincarnating soul are believed to influence the health of the infant. A similar seance takes place within 12 days after a death, during which family members of the deceased seek to determine the ultimate mystical cause of the death. In the present seance, the trance medium informs his clients that the spirit of Desak Putu Sri, a female ancestor, has returned to this earth in the infant boy. Reincarnating spirits are not ruled by gender lines.
Desak Putu Sri ini patut metejo nomadi ke Bali.
Now, the mother can resume her custom of bathing and washing clothes in the river. However, until her child attains the age of 42 days, this activity has ritual significance. While bathing, she stimulates the flow of milk by massaging her breasts. At each visit, she will place offerings at the river to appease the harmful spirits, imputed to be responsible for inducing maternal and infant illnesses. The anthropologist Margaret Mead and her husband Gregory Bateson spent over 2 years researching in Bali during the 1930s. The major thrust of their work concerned child behavior and development and its bearing on Balinese character. Their work is regarded as a milestone in the development of visual anthropology, as it marked the first scientific use of moving films and still photographs as instruments of research. From their findings, they claimed that the Balinese character is based upon a fear of transgressing divine rules by neglecting the supernatural dimensions of their world. This fear is balanced by the assuredness they hold in their social position and duties. A Balinese child is born into a walled compound consisting of several structures. These comply with the building code, which specifies materials, measurements, and locations of structures on the site. After marriage, a woman must move to the houseyard complex of her husband, though the married couple have their own household, that being defined as a separate kitchen. Thus, 2 or 3 generations of several nuclear family units may live together in a single houseyard. Each day after cooking, a few grains of rice and a sample of each food prepared are put on small squares of banana leaf and placed on the ground for the potentially dangerous spirits which share man's immediate environment and which all Balinese refer to as Butakala. Having attained the age of 12 days, an infant is considered to have survived the most precarious period, and therefore to be more likely to remain in this world. At this rite, a symbol of a baby, called a cholong, meaning stolen, is introduced. In this case, the symbol is simply a coconut frond marked by a white cross. It is an offering of exchange to the unseen forces and supernatural spirits involved in the spread of diseases, which frequently claim the lives of the newborn. The baby is ritually traded for the changeling effigy. After the mother and child receive holy water, the father and a close male relative discard the symbol of the changeling by setting it adrift in a stream. The priest requests the benevolence of the god Kumara, the protector of children, who resides in the small shrine above the infant's sleeping place. The betel nut box beside the baby offers further protection. Until this time, the mother, by traditional taboo, has been prohibited from entering the kitchen. Now, she may return to her normal tasks. At this stage, the child can also be given a name. Possible names are written on a leaf, attached to sticks of cotton, and set alight. The longest burning stick holds the child's name. Parents perform transitional rites for their children. With profound, yet obvious symmetry, children are expected to carry out rites of death for their parents. The underlying concern is the path of the soul, both in the afterworld and in this, the temporal world. An infant is discouraged from crawling and spends most of its time on its mother's or an elder sibling's hip as they go about their everyday chores. Crawling on four legs, like the scavenger dogs and pigs that share the family compound, they see as animalistic and not worthy of an ancestor so recently returned from a sojourn on the heavenly heights. Among the poor in developing tropical countries, 1/2 of all children died within the first year of life. Possibly this experience explains the role of Durga, the goddess of death, as a supreme force in Balinese metaphysical speculations and in many temple rituals. In temples associated with the powers of death, Durga is sometimes depicted as a devourer of babies, as destruction and death incarnate. The Sanskrit term Durga signifies the two aspects of existence, death and life. Dur means going, and Ga means coming. The cult mask, popularly known as Rangda, is a symbolic representation of Durga. If given appropriate deference, Durga Rangda affords protection to the community. If not, she can be awesomely destructive. The bodies of children who die before they have lost their milk teeth do not need to be cremated. Reincarnation is so recent that a return of their souls to the world of their ancestors is without difficulty. Quite early in life, both boys and girls are given responsibilities in the running of the household. Children help in the care of younger siblings, as well as with farming chores. The preparation of offerings for a rite of passage is the work of the women of the extended family, as well as experts. This 42 days birthright is being held by a family of high Kshatriya caste. Because of their greater wealth, they can afford to pay for a high priest to officiate. The priest prepares himself to become the vehicle of the high god Siwa. Meanwhile, family retainers sanctify all important buildings in the house yard. In this rite, the cholong is in the form of feathers attached to a banana stalk. Exploding bamboo cylinders scare away unwanted demons. Then, the infant is welcomed, and its new status is secured. At 105 days, the infant and the soul of the reincarnating ancestor are perceived to be more firmly planted in the temporal world. From a vessel filled with water, the infant is guided to scoop up miniature replicas of household items and coins. Silver bracelets and anklets, intended to strengthen the infant's life force, replace earlier cotton ones. The priest symbolically purifies the ground, and then, for the first time, the child's feet are planted on the ground. A symbolic offering of the world is turned and knocked with a stone. The child may now be taken to community temple rituals. Infants are treated with the kind of respect often reserved for gods. As they grow older and become more firmly part of the temporal world, less ritual attention is directed toward them. The children of this village are actively participating in a ritual feast given to them by their parents inside a temple. The usual reverence for elders by their children is temporarily reversed. Although Balinese children have few toys, their sense of play is strongly developed. The style of their games has changed little over the years. Children's acceptance of responsibilities is observable in the willingness of pre-adolescent girls to master the rigorous demands of the famous legong dance, the image of Bali most commonly seen in tourist promotions for the island. The performance begins with the dynamic dance of the maidservant of the two twin-like princesses. The princesses then perform a mirror-like dance of unrequited love. The storyline of the performance has been lost behind the complex choreography. Legong is now performed purely as entertainment. It is possible, though, to imagine its origins in the sacred trance dances of young girls, who, in similar costumes, represent celestial nymphs and act as mediums between the living community and the local village deities. As it probably always has, Bali continues to adapt to change. The Balinese have adjusted easily to being part of the Republic of Indonesia and to less individualistic forms of learning. Many different types of priests attend to the spiritual needs of the Balinese. Selection to the priesthood may be through trance revelation or an hereditary claim. In Balinese thinking, there is power, but also mystical danger in knowledge. Although virtues of discretion and wisdom, deemed essential in one aspiring to study sacred texts, are generally held to come with maturity, there are exceptions, as the case of this candidate boy priest shows. He is undergoing a series of rites of purification and consecration, which will render him spiritually prepared for the tasks ahead. The boy will be guided by a guru who acts as a mediator of the knowledge and power he will acquire. The ritual procedures are conducted by a number of priests from neighboring temples, as well as a high priest. A number of symbolic acts will mark the boy's transition to his new priestly status. With his hands, he smothers a small fire, signifying his detachment from his former carefree existence and acceptance of new responsibilities. The high priest inscribes mystical syllables to mark the locations of deities in his body and their activation. A circle of grass, signifying the element earth, placed around his forehead, symbolizes the consecration of his material body. As a grandson of the recently deceased priest, in time the boy would have had some hereditary claim to the priestly role. However, his suitability to assume the responsibility at this stage was revealed in the trance utterances of a group of priests. As with all religious occasions, the community are eager to receive the blessings of holy water from the high priest at this important occasion, held for the future well-being of their village. Before final ordination, the boy will undergo a period of isolation, abstinence, and ascetic meditation in temples throughout Bali. These practices are intended to deepen the boy's awareness of his non-material body, especially of his kanda empat, the spiritualized elements of the physical body, which he must learn to manipulate when attending to the needs of others in times of sickness and stress. In the traditional villages of East Bali, There are fixed days on which rituals are performed by the unmarried boys and girls who belong to segregated youth groups. Although it is a religious occasion, the adolescents, though maintaining their separate status, utilize this opportunity in a time-honored manner to observe and flirt. In former times, rulers and their subjects attended each other's life cycle rites. Even today, this mutual obligation is, to a large extent, still adhered to. Parents extend invitations to a large number of people to attend the ritual tooth filing of their children. As well as offerings for the kanda empat to secure the protection of the individual, deemed to be again vulnerable at this stage of life, there are also numerous ones for the deities of love. Sometime before marriage, most Balinese undergo a filing of the upper incisor and canine and the lower canine teeth to make them even. For 3 days and nights prior to the ceremony, these youths have been isolated. The filer rubs a gold ring across the teeth to cool them before commencing filing, and places protective mantra on them. The filings from the teeth are placed in the shell of a young coconut and buried beside the household shrine. Some say that teeth are filed in order to remind an individual of the need to contain destructive human passions, such as lust, greed, and anger, and to increase self-awareness. Others explain that it is to obliterate possible resemblance to tusked and fanged animals, and that it is a precaution against being reborn that way. The romantic life of a Balinese male often begins in the festive atmosphere of a community-commissioned flirtatious dance performance. It is one of the few Balinese dances performed in non-sacred space and, until disco, was possibly the only form of social dance known on Bali. It is orchestrated by a seductive young woman who invites men from the audience to join her in an improvised flirtatious response. Males of all ages usually respond to her alluring challenge, though young men, despite their apparent bravado, often betray their inexperience and bashfulness in such matters to the great amusement of the audience. Those more accomplished gleefully demonstrate their worldly sophistication. Observing this dance, Mead and Bateson detected a continuation of the theme of arousal and then frustration, which they'd investigated in Balinese child rearing, and particularly breastfeeding practices. Even death, they wrote, is celebrated without a strong sense of finality. To this cultural restraint, they attributed the Balinese people's usual avoidance of argument and their desire to maintain, as paramount, the harmony of family and village life. The marriage ceremony is the final ritual parents do for the physical and spiritual well-being of their children. The prospective groom and his relatives fetch the bride and bring her to his house yard. Before they enter the compound, an offering of pungent-smelling spices, egg, garlic and onion is made, and the blood of a young chicken is shed for the appeasement of demonic spirits who might thwart the successful completion of the marriage, either now or in the future. The numerous images, objects and actions which form the marriage rite symbolize the material and spiritual essences needed by the man and woman, and the life they will share as lovers, parents and providers. The lis, a representation of the human body formed of strips of shaped palm leaves, is used to splash sanctified water over the couple. In all Balinese rites of purification and transition, the symbolic lis is an indispensable item. Ideally, the relationship between husband and wife will be one of equality. He will do most of the heavy agricultural tasks. She will participate actively in all rites associated with rice harvesting. In fact, most of their domestic and ritual activities will involve their joint participation. They will share the responsibility of the daily care of children. The couple circle a rice mortar in the direction of the Hindu swastika, a symbol of prosperity. She carries a woven basket, signifying her willingness to bear children. Cooking and weaving will become her daily tasks. He carries a shooting coconut and strikes his spouse across the shoulder, symbolizing his readiness to assume the task of providing food for the family. Together, they walk through a thread which symbolizes the severance of former ties and the acceptance of new ones. She squats over a coconut and over smoking sandalwood to warm the womb in readiness for procreation. They are given coins wrapped in lotus petals as a magical inducement to their prosperity. The penetration of the plaited palm leaf square by the kris is an obvious allusion to successful coitus and thus fertility. Finally, devotion is paid to the god and goddess of love, Asmara and Rati, who represent the sun and the moon and the sperm and the ovum. As in any rite of transition, ancestral deities are informed of the change in status. Not until they produce children will the couple be considered real adult members of their family and the wider community. The married couple will also now acquire new financial and practical responsibilities in the village temples and village government. On the 210-day commemoration of the founding of a temple, members of the extended families, who have affiliations with that particular temple, gather together. The beating of the slit-log drum, called kulkul, calls the community to attend temple rites conducted on its behalf. Depending on the number and rhythm of the beating, kulkul are also used to announce such things as the death of a fellow villager, as an alert on the discovery of a theft, to warn the community of a pending disaster, or to announce the descent of deities into their temple shrines. A water timing device records late arrivals, who may be either asked to pay a fine or else contribute more labor to the upkeep of the temple. Women bring the family offering of rice cakes, fruit, and a grilled chicken, which, with great labor, they have lovingly prepared over the days before the festival to honor the temple deities. Each Balinese village has at least 3 major temples. The Pura Pusa, which honors the founding deities of the village, is located on highest ground above the village, from where the life-supporting water comes. This is usually in the direction of Mount Agung, the highest mountain of the island. At the crossroads in the middle of the village is the Pura Desa, the temple of the living community. The Pura Dalam, the temple of Durga, where the powers of the dead are invoked, is located south and is closest to the sea. Together, they represent birth, life, and death. On temple festival occasions, the deities who reside in the other temples of the village are invited to enter their images and are then brought to participate in the rites at the temple whose celebration is in progress. The deities visiting the temple partake of the spiritual essence of the offerings brought by the women. Later, the family will enjoy their material benefit. Before the magnificently decorated shrines of the deities, an attendant priest of the temple dispenses holy water to family groups. The water bestows release from any impediment or contamination on those who worship and provides blessings from the assembled temple deities and Sangyang Widiwasa, the unknowable, the Godhead, the supreme manifestation of all the deities of Bali. Balinese attitude to old age are depicted in this masked dance performance in which the frailties of the aged are lovingly parodied. To attain old age and to have numerous descendants who can provide for one's physical needs and attend to one's death rites are ideals sought by all. With age, the cycle on earth approaches completeness, and the concern, given earlier to the soul of the newborn, is now bestowed on the soul which will soon return to the realm of the ancestors. The cremation of a man renowned for his learning and wisdom was held in Denpasar, the capital of Bali, on March the 17th, 1986. The man, colloquially called the King of Denpasar, was the sole survivor of a dynasty wiped out by colonial invaders in the first decade of this century. This tower is all that remains of the original palace after this momentous cataclysm. Chokorda Gede Nura Permachutam, the recently deceased, was 8 years old when he was found, wounded but alive, in amongst the pile of over 1,000 bodies of his kinsmen and women who had processed directly into the formidable guns of their Dutch opponents. In the afternoon prior to the cremation, there is a pre-funerary procession through the streets of Denpasar, attended by all members of the late king's extended clan. In the procession, a grandson of the deceased king carries a family heirloom, the sacred kris, or sword. The huge Ogar Ogar, a puppet image of chaos, confusion and hilarity, appears to be a recent addition to funerary and other ritual processions, where thronging crowds and noisy excitement are considered desirable for their successful completion. Despite the Puputan, the clan of Permachutan is now the largest on Bali. The family owes its great size to a king of the early 17th century who had 80 wives and children too numerous to count. Relatives and former subjects exhume the remains of their dead. They will take advantage of the forthcoming great ceremonial cremation of the king to enhance the passage of the souls of their own relatives. At the graveyard, a high priest pounds the earth 3 times with his staff, summoning the spirits of the dead to enter it. Bones, the last remains of the physical body, are carefully gathered, washed in coconut milk and lime, and generally attended to in much the same way as the corpse had been prior to burial. Offerings would have been placed by their graves in the same sequence as birth rites had been conducted during life. Finally, the bones are laid out in human form, ready for further purification through fire. The human souls will be represented by flower and sandalwood effigies. At midnight of the full moon, the body of the king, which has lain in the main household pavilion amid family heirlooms since death, is unwrapped and washed by his male children with his 8 wives in close attendance. This is a preparation for the beginning of his soul's journey, which will take place during the required phase of the waning moon. The most senior wife of the deceased places her hand across his genitals throughout the ritual washing. The Balinese find it difficult to comprehend the philosophy of life of others, which allows them to consign the care of the bodies of their deceased to strangers. On the evening prior to the cremation, the bull casket in which the king's body will be burnt and the base of the funerary tower, which represents the world of men, are taken from the palace to the street. The 11-tiered tower, representing the 11 heavens attainable by one of such high caste, is then connected to the base. Standing at 25 meters, the tower, which symbolizes the 3 worlds that constitute the Balinese universe, the celestial world of the 11 heavens, the middle world of mankind, and the lower world of demons and the supernatural, is now ready for tomorrow, when it will carry the body of the king on his last journey through the streets of his hereditary kingdom of Denpasar. At the base of the tower, entwined around the turtle on which the world rests, is the giant serpent, responsible for the stability of the earth. The lion-like Boma head and the eagle-like Garuda, symbols of ambiguous power, embody destruction and creation, death and life. The night prior to cremation is perceived as a time of danger. Unseen forces can operate to prevent the desired passage of the soul, and even endanger the lives of those whose existence is linked to the deceased. A high priest creates the holy water for the rituals of death by the cosmic act of shooting an arrow, tipped with a lotus flower, into a vat of water. This is distributed to the close family by the heir apparent. A shadow puppet enactment of the hazardous journey of the legendary Bhima in search of his parents in the afterworld is an instruction to the wandering souls of the deceased, an offering to appease unmanifest powers, and entertainment for the living. On the day of the cremation procession, the busy streets of Denpasar will be closed to traffic. Overhead wires are cut to allow for the passage of the 11-tiered funerary tower. For the Balinese, cremation is not a time of mourning. It is a time when ideals of decorum are suspended, replaced by intense, frenzied activity. Displays of grief are considered to be an impediment to the release of the soul. The bird of paradise, a symbolic aid to the flight of the soul, will accompany the body in the funeral tower on its passage to the cremation ground. The bull, a representation of JIWA, the creator and destroyer, receives last-minute attention. The governor and other honored guests are received by the family of the deceased king. The cremation procedures of the other 560 souls who are accompanying their king have already begun. Soon after midday, exactly 42 days after his death, the body of the king is taken from the palace and placed in the funerary tower for the boisterous procession to the cremation ground, where the powers of death are invoked. At the crossroads, the 200 or more carriers of the vast tower, which now contains the mortal remains of the king, rotate the tower 3 times, so as to confuse the soul of the deceased. Simultaneous with the almost frenzied beating of the processional gong orchestra and the roar of the vast crowd, the soft tunes of the gendare maintain a semblance of harmony for the passing soul amongst the chaos which accompanies its departure from familiar environments. The symbolic body, the purpose of which is to correlate the 4 spiritual brethren who have attended the individual from the womb and throughout life, is first carried down the ramp and placed in the bull. Then follows the corpse, wrapped in white. Priest, accompanied by the sons of the deceased, prepares the body for its final purification through fire and water. Soon, the 560 individuals, cremated with their king, will begin their voyage to the tiered heavens of the ancestors. Soon, the individuals and their kanda and pats will return to the 4 fundamental elements of life, that is, to water, fire, earth, and air. In an act of great daring, a young man climbs to the precarious top of the 25-meter funerary tower to retrieve heirloom cloths and gold leaf. Balinese cremation is, in fact, what the anthropologist Clifford Geertz described as the quintessential royal ceremony. It is splendid, turbulent, yet rigorously ordered and choreographed down to the finest detail. As the procession bearing the ashes, the last earthly remains of the recently cremated, leaves the cremation ground for the sea for final disposal, a great fire is made from the Tower of the 11 Heavens, now that its purpose has been fulfilled. In 12 days' time, and again after 42 days, further rites will be held to ensure the return of the souls to the realm of deified ancestors. In Balinese belief, death is regarded as a force as powerful and as life-confirming as birth, in that at death, the soul is released to join the ancestor heaven, from which it returns again at birth. The path of the soul is eternal.